The engagement banquet was supposed to be the culmination of my entire life, the celebration of a promise made between my family and his before either of us could even walk. Instead, it became the stage for my world's collapse. It was there that Leo, my childhood friend and fiancé, first laid eyes on my stepsister Sophie, who had only just been welcomed into our home. In that single glance, a lifetime of shared memories between us turned to dust. Everyone, from our parents to our mutual friends, urged me to be graceful, to step aside, and let this new, incandescent love run its course. But I refused. I wept and screamed, creating a scene so desperate and ugly that it solidified their pity and contempt. I fought for a love that was already dead. That fight led to my ruin. In the weeks that followed, Leo, the boy who once promised to protect me forever, hired men to abduct me. They dragged me into darkness, subjected me to unspeakable humiliations, and when they were finished, they discarded my broken body in the cold, murky waters of the river. As my family celebrated Sophie's wedding to Leo, a grand affair filled with blessings and joy, no one knew that I was slowly being consumed by the mud and the fish. No one came looking. My soul, however, clung to a thread of obsession, a witness to the life that should have been mine. Then, I opened my eyes. The familiar din of the engagement party filled my ears. I was back, reborn into the very moment my life had first shattered. This time, I would not fight for a ghost. I would grant Leo his wish to be with his one true love, and then I would turn and marry the one person he despised most in the world, his older, adopted brother, Julian. Before I was born, my mother and Leo's had made a pact. We were betrothed in our cradles, our futures entwined. We grew up as two halves of a whole, inseparable playmates, whose bond felt as natural as breathing. I still remember him as a boy, his hand small but firm in mine, promising, "Clara, my Clara, you have to grow up fast so I can make you my wife." He was my champion, my fierce protector. He would get into fistfights for me, returning with a split lip and bloodied knuckles but a triumphant grin, having defended my honor. I was so certain our life would mirror a fairy tale, a seamless journey into a shared forever. That certainty evaporated at our engagement banquet. My mother had been gone for less than a year when my father, Richard, remarried. With his new wife, Helen, came her daughter, Sophie, the product of an affair he'd had while my mother was still alive. Her sudden appearance in our lives was a wound, and my furious opposition to her presence led to her being sent away to live with relatives in the countryside. That act made me the villain in my own home, the difficult daughter who couldn't accept her father's new happiness. So, when a gentler, more sensible Sophie returned just in time for my engagement, everyone saw her as the wronged party. They all pleaded with me to let Leo go, to relinquish my claim. I loved him too much to listen. In a fit of desperate defiance, I even brought out my mother's memorial portrait, using her memory as a shield to silence them. I thought I had saved our engagement, but I had only delayed the inevitable. A month before the wedding, on my way to a final fitting for my gown, I was snatched off the street. The men who took me were cruel, their actions designed to shatter not just my body, but my spirit. As I drew my last breath, I heard one of them on the phone. The voice on the other end, cold and familiar, was Leo's. My fiancé. He was paying them, thanking them for clearing the way so he could finally be with Sophie. As I sank into the river, my body becoming food for the creatures of the deep, my spirit watched as Sophie and Leo celebrated their union. Their wedding was a spectacle of love and light, while I was lost to the darkness. In all the world, only one person searched for me, his calls of my name echoing into the void. "Clara, I'm sorry. I can't get engaged to you." The voice pulled my consciousness back into my body. I was standing in the grand ballroom, Reborn. Whispers swirled around me like smoke. I could feel the weight of their gazes, some laced with sympathy, others with open disdain. Sophie stood just behind Leo, her expression a perfect mask of heartbroken apology. "What did you just say?" I asked, my own voice startlingly calm and devoid of emotion. Leo must have mistaken my stillness for the prelude to another hysterical outburst. His tone sharpened with impatience. "Clara, after meeting Sophie, I finally understand. What you and I have, it's the love between a brother and a sister, nothing more. If you agree to cancel the engagement, I promise I'll care for you like my own sister for the rest of our lives." Before I could even respond, Sophie stepped forward, tears already tracing paths down her cheeks. "Sister, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You've always been so generous to me, but Leo and we're truly in love. Please, I'm begging you, let us be together." She looked like a fragile white lotus, wilting under my presumed cruelty, as if I were the one persecuting her. Leo instinctively reached out, dabbing at her tears with a tenderness he had once reserved only for me. When I remained silent, his expression hardened into resentment, casting me as the wicked villainess standing in the way of true love. This performance of theirs was almost nauseating. I let my gaze drift over the assembled guests, the so-called friends and family watching the drama unfold. How many of them had built their current, comfortable lives on the back of my mother's generosity and influence? Now, not a single one would speak for her daughter. The memory of the dead fades so quickly. They had no idea that before she died, my mother had left every last one of her assets, her entire fortune, to me and me alone. "Clara, what is your answer?" Leo pressed, his patience wearing thin. "Fine," I said, my voice clear and steady. "I agree. We can cancel the engagement." My swift agreement stunned him into silence. He stared at me, his mouth slightly agape, clearly having braced himself for a storm that never came. "However," I continued, my eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Julian Alastair, Leo's adopted brother, the one he considered a thorn in his side. "I have one condition." I gathered the silk of my gown in my hands and walked toward him, each step deliberate. I stopped directly in front of him, looking up into his surprised face. "Julian, would you be willing to get engaged to me?" Julian, who had been watching the proceedings with a detached sort of amusement, was momentarily taken aback. Then a slow, knowing smile curved his lips. "I would be honored," he said, his voice a low, cool counterpoint to the tense atmosphere. My family offered no objection to this sudden change of plans. My father, Richard, was simply relieved that his precious new daughter, Sophie, had gotten what she wanted. He didn't care who I ended up with. In his mind, Julian was merely an adopted son, his status a far cry from that of the biological heir, Leo. Mrs. Alastair, Leo's mother, looked at me with an expression of profound guilt and nodded her silent approval. Leo, however, was furious. "No! Clara, you can't get engaged to him!" I turned to look at him as if he were a complete fool. Leo had detested Julian for as long as I could remember. Julian was too smart, too capable, too everything, and his quiet excellence constantly eclipsed Leo's more flamboyant efforts. "Clara, I know you're just doing this to make me angry," Leo pleaded, trying to adopt a tone of sincere concern. "But marriage is a lifelong commitment. I don't want you to throw your life away because of a moment of anger." He seemed genuinely moved by his own magnanimity, completely oblivious to the venom in Sophie's eyes as she watched him plead for my future. "Who said anything about anger?" I replied coolly. "In every way that matters, Julian is a better man than you, Leo." I paused, letting my words sink in. "And just so we're clear, this is not about you anymore. This is me, Clara Fairchild, choosing to end our engagement. It's me who no longer wants you." The finality in my voice seemed to physically strike him. He actually stumbled back a few steps. I took Julian's offered hand and, with a brilliant smile, announced to the stunned crowd that the engagement banquet would proceed as planned. I felt no anger, only a profound sense of release. It was only after my death in my previous life that I had learned the truth. Julian had been in love with me for years. While everyone else was celebrating the supposed happy ending of Leo and Sophie, he was the only one frantically searching for any trace of me. In the days that followed my engagement to Julian, Leo would occasionally visit, always with Sophie in tow. They would parade their affection in front of me, a constant, cloying performance. Adhering to my new principle of self-preservation, I simply ignored them, pretending not to see the pointed looks and smug smiles Sophie sent my way. One afternoon, as I was getting some juice from the refrigerator, Sophie cornered me in the kitchen, unable to contain her taunts any longer. Sister, thank you again for letting me have Leo. We'll all still be one big family, won't we? Though I do wonder which of us the Alistair family will value more in the end. I should be thanking you, I said, my voice loud enough for Leo to hear from the living room. You've done me the great service of taking out the trash. I saw him stand and start toward the kitchen. At that moment, Sophie snatched the glass from my hand, flung the juice onto her own face, and her expression instantly crumpled into one of a victim. Tears welled in her eyes. Sister, I know you hate me because Leo chose me, but you can't humiliate me like this. Our love isn't a crime. Her pathetic act immediately triggered Leo's protective instincts. He stormed into the kitchen. Clara, apologize to Sophie right now. I looked at the two of them, a matched set of fools, and felt a wave of utter exhaustion. Apologize to her? Leo, who do you think you are? If you have some kind of delusion, go see a doctor. Don't come into my house and shout at me. Sophie began to sob. Leo, forget it. It's all my fault. It's only right that she splashed me. I just didn't want her to have a misunderstanding with you. The sight of his true love's suffering was more than Leo could bear. He raised his hand to strike me, but this time, I was ready. I caught his wrist in a firm grip, used his momentum to twist his arm, and with my free hand, I delivered a sharp slap across his face. Clara, how dare you hit me? He sputtered, his eyes wide with disbelief. The little actress beside him was equally stunned. Sister, how could you? Sophie finally gasped, rushing to cradle Leo's cheek with a look of theatrical distress. I slapped her too. Why couldn't I? I'll hit you as well. Leo, are you blind or just an idiot? The glass was in her hand. You're just going to believe whatever she says? Done with their drama, I shoved Leo aside and walked toward the front door. Behind me, I could hear Sophie's frantic, tearful explanation. Leo, why would I pour juice on myself? She forced the cup into my hand after she splashed me. I could almost laugh at the absurdity of it. If only I could stuff her back into her mother's womb so she wouldn't be here to disgust me. I drove to the Alistair Group's corporate headquarters and went straight up to Julian's office. He had a brilliant mind for business, and his adoptive father had given him significant responsibilities right out of university. My own father, terrified I might actually try to take over my mother's company, had arranged an internship for me at the Alistair Group, which meant Julian and I had spent a fair amount of time together back then. You're here, he said, looking up from a mountain of paperwork. I have a bit more to get through. You can have a seat for a while. Take your time, I said, settling onto the sofa across from his desk. I watched him work, his focus absolute. His features were classically handsome, sharp and intelligent, his eyes dark and intense. I had to admit, Julian was far more striking than Leo. Being with him didn't seem like a bad prospect at all. Because of my history with Leo, I'd always seen Julian as just a brother, an older, quieter presence. He had always been kind to me, even when Leo was being dismissive or cruel to him. I had no idea when his feelings for me had changed. My stare must have been too intense because he eventually looked up, his work forgotten. When our eyes met, I saw something flicker in his, a deep, aching tenderness. It's lunchtime, he said, his voice softer now. Let's go eat. He set his pen down and led me out of the company building. What are you in the mood for? He asked, his tone lighter, pleased by my quiet compliance. Hot pot, I said immediately. Let's go have hot pot. We found a restaurant nearby. Over the meal, Julian noticed the redness on my hand and asked about it. I simply told him someone had accidentally run their face into my palm. As fate would have it, the person in question was in the very same restaurant. Clara, what are you two doing here together? Leo had this unhinged quality about him ever since I'd gotten engaged to Julian. What's wrong with me being with my fiancé? I asked. At the word fiancé, I saw Julian's posture relax, a small smile touching his lips. Sister, Julian, we're all family here, Sophie chirped, pulling a chair over to our table. Since we ran into each other, we should all sit together. As she spoke, she made sure to angle her face, still bearing the faint red mark of my handprint toward Julian. Honestly, I wouldn't have the nerve to show my face in public like that. I suspected she was about to try another one of her tricks, and I was more than happy to let her. Sister, congratulations on your engagement to Julian, she said sweetly. Call him Julian, or Mr. Allister. Julian corrected her before I could speak, his tone glacial. And I don't have a sister. Sophie's eyes instantly filled with tears. She bit her lip, looking at him with a wounded expression, but Julian was immune to her performance. She then turned her tragic gaze on Leo, who ducked his head like an ostrich, pretending to be intensely interested in the menu. He hated Julian, but he was also afraid of him. Seeing she was getting no reaction, Sophie quickly composed herself. Sister, you love bamboo shoots, she said, her voice bright again. She picked a piece out of the boiling pot with her chopsticks, but as she moved to place it on my plate, she accidentally raised her hand too high, letting the scalding piece of food tumble directly toward my hand. Julian moved faster than I could blink. He snatched the small dipping saucer from the table, caught the falling bamboo shoot, and with a flick of his wrist sent it flying right back at Sophie's face. To prevent my dear sister from being too badly burned, I immediately grabbed the pitcher of ice water from the table and doused her with it. Clara, big brother, you've gone too far, was all Leo could manage, holding a sputtering Sophie and barking uselessly. It was a waiter who finally had the presence of mind to call for an ambulance. Thanks to my quick thinking with the cold water, the doctor said Sophie's face wasn't severely burned. Nevertheless, she insisted they wrap her entire head in gauze, no doubt wanting to look as pathetic as possible for the confrontation she was planning at home. Sure enough, when I arrived back at my house, Sophie was curled in her mother Helen's arms, sobbing as if her heart would break. My stepmother was dabbing at her own eyes, her face a mask of distress. You wicked, ungrateful girl, my father Richard roared at me. How could you be so vicious? You tried to destroy your sister's face. He looked at me not like a daughter, but like an enemy. Though I should have been used to it, a sharp pain still lanced through my chest. I remembered a time when he would lift me high above his head, promising to pluck the stars from the sky for me. What had happened to that man? After my mother died, he couldn't wait to move his mistress and their illegitimate daughter into our home. Anything Sophie wanted, even heirlooms my mother had left for me, he would take and give to her. He once swore he'd break Leo's legs if he ever dared to hurt me, but after Leo had me kidnapped, my father was happily planning another daughter's wedding, relieved that I, the inconvenient one, was out of the way. If not for the fact that my mother's bank vault could only be opened when I came of age, I'm sure I would have been the one shipped off to the countryside. Looking at this picture of a happy family of 3, I felt nothing but a bitter, hollow ridicule. Clara, I know you've never liked me or Sophie, Helen said, her voice thick with disappointment. But I have always treated you as my own. When you and Sophie couldn't get along, I sent my own daughter away for your sake. If you have a grievance, take it out on me. Why would you try to disfigure her? Anyone hearing her would think she was a saint and I was a monster. As your own daughter? I laughed. If you truly saw me as your daughter, would you have let Sophie secretly carry on with Leo behind my back? Do you really think I'm naive enough to believe their story about love at first sight? In my last life, I didn't learn until it was too late that they had known each other for years before that engagement party. You're lying, Sophie shrieked from behind her bandages. You're just angry because you couldn't have what you wanted. You slapped me at home and then you burned my face at the restaurant. You just want to ruin me so you can have Leo back. Unlike you and your mother, I don't have a taste for being a mistress, I said flatly. The single sentence made the faces of all 3 of them twist in fury. Get out, my father bellowed, his entire body trembling with rage. He pointed a shaking finger at the door. Get out of this house and never come back, I sneered. Dad, have you forgotten? Every house this family owns is in my mother's name. My father had married into my mother's wealth, a fact my grandfather never let him forget. He'd been forced to sign a prenuptial agreement relinquishing any claim to the family property. Then I'll beat you to death, you unfilial child. You dare? The hand he raised froze midair. Just then, Julian walked through the door. He strode over to me, wrapping an arm around my shoulders and checking me over for any sign of harm. Once he was satisfied I was untouched, his cold gaze fell upon my father. Though Julian was adopted, Mr. and Mrs. Allister had never once treated him poorly. They had raised him to be their heir, and he had already built a formidable reputation for himself in the business world. The aura of authority he radiated was enough to intimidate most people, especially someone like my father, who was all bluster and no backbone. "Who was it that wanted to beat my fiancée to death?" Julian asked, pulling me behind him. His voice was so cold it could have frozen the room. Sophie visibly shrank back into her mother's arms. She had been crying about how I had disfigured her, conveniently forgetting it was Julian who had actually thrown the food. "Julian, Clara has been spoiled rotten," my father stammered, trying to assume the role of a stern future father-in-law. "If I don't discipline her now, she'll only cause problems for you in the future." Julian was not impressed. "Clara was educated perfectly well by her mother," he stated coolly. "She doesn't act like a mistress, nor does she cheat on her fiancé." I had to admit, Julian and I were a perfect match. His words hit their mark, and the faces of the three people opposite us flushed with shame and anger. "He's just an adopted son, after all," my father muttered, trying to save face. "No manners. He can't compare to Leo." He seemed to forget that Leo, much like himself, was also a cheater. "An adopted son who can make your company go bankrupt overnight," Julian retorted. "Would you like to experience that firsthand, Richard?" Thinking of Julian's ruthless reputation, my father fell silent. Julian then took out his phone and played the security footage from the hot pot restaurant. My father and Helen clearly saw the entire incident unfold. Sophie, however, remained strangely calm. "Your sister didn't mean to do it," my father said, waving a dismissive hand at the video. "Besides, it's better that your hand was almost scalded than for her to injure her face." I stared at the man who was supposedly my biological father, and the last fragile thread of familial affection in my heart finally snapped. "I'm an adult now," I said. "It's time to open the safe deposit box my mother left for me." My father's eyes lit up. He had been pressuring me to open it for years. He believed he had fooled my mother so completely, that she had loved him so deeply, that she surely must have left her fortune in his care. He had no idea she had seen right through him and had not left him a single penny. Before, I had hesitated, partly out of a lingering sense of family obligation, afraid he couldn't handle the truth. Now, it was time for him to face reality. Hearing my decision, the mistress and her daughter also perked up, faint traces of excitement on their faces. They assumed that whatever my father inherited would eventually become theirs. "Before we go to the bank, you have to sign an agreement," I said. "After I receive my inheritance, I am officially severing all ties with you. You will have no say in my life, and I will have no obligation to support you in your old age." Richard hesitated. "Oh, Clara, he's still your father," Helen interjected, ever the peacemaker. "He only said those things because he was angry and worried about you. You shouldn't hold a grudge." Her words were all it took. Richard immediately agreed and signed the papers. We met at the bank, each of us with our lawyers. Under the expectant gazes of Richard, Helen, and Sophie, the bank manager retrieved the heavy safe deposit box and placed it in front of me. I had to hide a smile. My father still didn't understand that if my mother had truly trusted him, she never would have gone to all this trouble. I slowly entered the password, the soft clicks echoing in the silent room. The lock disengaged with a final, definitive thud. Richard shoved me aside, grabbing the will from inside and frantically flipping through the pages. Julian steadied me, his hand on my arm, his voice a low murmur asking if I was all right. I just shook my head, a small, triumphant smile on my face. "Impossible! This can't be real. It must be a fake." After his rapid scan, Richard started over, reading every word with painstaking care. The will made no mention of him whatsoever. Every asset, every stock, every property was left solely to me. "Clara, where is the real will?" Helen dropped her kindly facade. "Yes, where is it?" she demanded, her face contorted with greed. "First of all," I said, my voice cutting through their hysteria, "this is the only will my mother left. Secondly, it has nothing to do with Richard, which means it has even less to do with you. What right do you have to question me?" "You little brat! How dare you talk to your mother that way?" Richard lunged at me, forgetting Julian was even there. Julian intercepted him easily, grabbing his arm and shoving him back with considerable force. "Clara, how could you let him hit Dad?" Sophie shrieked, rushing to help her father up while simultaneously trying to paint me as the villain. Sophie, from this moment on, he is only your father, I said coldly. He means nothing to me. Oh, and by the way, the house you're living in is now mine. Since we've severed ties, I'll give you 2 days to move out. If you're not gone by then, I'll have people help you with your things. For the next 2 days, Julian stationed security around my house to watch the family. Richard and Helen came to my door, taking turns trying to appeal to my emotions. But I refused to see them. They even managed to bring Leo with them to plead their case. Leo! The moment Sophie saw him, she threw herself into his arms and began to sob dramatically. Clara, Sophie's father is your biological father, Leo said, his voice full of reproach. How can you just throw him out? He's not my father anymore, I said, waving the signed agreement at him. How could you become like this? He asked, shaking his head in disappointment. I know you're taking all this out on Sophie and her mother because of me, but isn't this going too far? He looked at me with an expression of profound pity, so convinced that my actions were all a desperate plea for his attention. Leo, I said, sighing, if you don't own a mirror, you can always use a puddle. Take a good look at yourself. Do you really think you're worth all this trouble? A flicker of hatred crossed his face. You didn't by any chance hook up with my brother while we were still engaged, did you? He sneered. A person with a dirty mind sees everything as dirty, I retorted. Since he had done something so despicable himself, it was only natural he'd project the same guilt onto me. Get the second young master out of here, Julian, who had just arrived, instructed the security guards. They dragged a shouting and cursing Leo away. Sister, how could you do that to Leo? Sophie cried, stomping her foot in frustration. I'll give you one last chance, Clara, Richard said, his voice low and threatening as he stood by the gate with their luggage. Tear up that agreement, sign your mother's company over to me to manage, and I will still acknowledge you as my daughter. No, thank you, I said calmly. My mother's company has professional managers, and from now on, I'll be withdrawing all of my investments and severing any business ties with your company. It's best we have nothing to do with each other ever again. You're just as heartless as that mother of yours, he choked out, clutching his chest. He even dared to curse my mother. Just as I was about to respond, a swarm of Helen's relatives descended upon us, having been called in as reinforcements. Clara, how could you chase your own father out? One aunt clucked disapprovingly. That's right, he's still your father, and your mother was wrong to leave so much property to a child. Another chimed in. I looked at the crowd of leeches in amusement, these people who had lived off my mother's wealth for years, now blaming both of us. Throw all of these people out, I instructed the security team. And from now on, none of Richard's or Helen's relatives are to be allowed on this property. Ignoring their curses, I pointed to the suitcases. Open them, check everything carefully, and take back anything that belongs to me or my mother. The sight of guards rifling through his possessions was the final straw. My father's eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed. His loving wife and daughter were so preoccupied with protecting their luggage that they didn't even notice him on the ground until the guards had finished their work and confiscated a small fortune in jewelry. By the time he reached the hospital, he had suffered a massive stroke. He was left paralyzed, his mouth twisted, his eyes vacant. Within days, Sophie and her mother launched a smear campaign, live streaming from the hospital. They painted a picture of long-term abuse, accusing me of driving my father to a stroke. Sophie tearfully displayed her arm, covered in what looked like shocking scars. If I didn't know better, I might have believed her. Leo, having snuck out of his own home, joined the broadcast, hugging Sophie and portraying them as star-crossed lovers persecuted by my jealousy. Clara was cheating on me with my own brother. He wept for the camera. It was Sophie who helped me through that heartbreaking time, and I never thought Clara would hold such a grudge. Before he could finish his monologue, Mrs. Allister, his own mother, burst into the hospital room. She strode past the cameras and slapped him hard across the face, not once, but several times. Mom! He cried out in shock. Don't you dare call me Mom! She shrieked, her usual gentle composure gone, replaced by a white-hot fury. I don't have a disgraceful son like you. To smear Clara and your own brother online for this pretentious little liar. I looked over at Julian, who was watching the live stream with me. A silent understanding passed between us. I finally understood the source of his uncanny ability to see through pretense. It was hereditary, but I had only ever known Mrs. Allister to be a paragon of grace and cultivation. This raw, uncontrolled rage was new. It was then I suspected the truth. "Should we go over there?" I asked. He nodded, and we drove to the hospital. The corridor outside Richard's room was a chaotic scrum of reporters. Inside, Mrs. Allister was trapped. Sophie was giving an interview, spinning her lies. My sister has always disliked me. My father was so depressed after her mother died, he tried to end his own life, and it was my mother who saved him. "Excuse me, please make way," I called out. "Clara Fairchild is here." The crowd fell silent, and every camera and microphone turned toward me. I saw a flash of triumph in Sophie's eyes. "Miss Fairchild, why did you have your father beaten? Are the injuries on Miss Sophie from you? How can you be so cruel to the woman who raised you?" The questions were an onslaught of accusations. The reporters had already tried and convicted me. Julian shielded me as we pushed our way into the room. I smiled serenely at the reporters, walked straight into the attached bathroom, and came out with a wet cloth. "What are you doing?" Sophie asked, a note of panic in her voice as I approached her. "Auntie, could you please hold her for me?" I asked Mrs. Allister. "With pleasure," she said, gripping Sophie's arm in an iron hold. Julian's men blocked the door, keeping the reporters and a screaming Helen at bay. "Ladies and gentlemen of the press," I announced, "please watch closely. You are about to witness a miracle." "Let me go! Clara, you're insane!" I rubbed the wet cloth hard against Sophie's arm. The skin turned red, but slowly, the gruesome-looking scars began to smudge and wipe away, revealing them to be nothing but cleverly applied theatrical paint. "The scars are fake," someone shouted. "We've been deceived." I calmly took a folded paper from my pocket, a copy of Sophie's birth certificate, and handed it to the nearest reporter. It was passed around the room, and with each person who read it, a new wave of gasps rippled through the crowd. "Sophie is Richard's biological daughter. She's only a few months younger than Clara. So he cheated right after getting married. No wonder his wife cut him out of the will." Seeing the tide turn against her, Sophie started to cry again. "I didn't know anything about my parents' affair, but that doesn't give Clara the right to beat my father." Slap. Mrs. Allister struck her again. "There's security footage from the front gate. Shall we play it for everyone and see what really happened?" She turned her fury on Leo. "And you," she said, slapping him again. "Not only her, but you too. I'm telling you now, Leo, you're on your own. If you ever dare to come home again, I will personally have your legs broken." She then left the hospital, taking Julian and me with her. In the car, Mrs. Allister pulled me into a tight hug, her tears soaking my shoulder. "My dear child, I am so sorry. It's all my fault. I should have looked for you." I was stunned. Her words confirmed my suspicion. She had been reborn too. I gently patted her back, soothing her. "Auntie, don't cry. It's all over now." I had never blamed her. After my mother died, she had been kinder to me than my own father, treating me like her own daughter. Looking over at Julian, who had been my silent protector through all of this, a sudden, powerful urge washed over me. "Julian," I said, turning to him in the driver's seat, "let's get married." The car screeched to a halt as he slammed on the brakes, the sound betraying his shock. "Clara, you're willing to marry me?" "Of course. Did you think I only got engaged to you to make Leo jealous?" His wide-eyed, hopeful expression told me that was exactly what he'd thought. This silly, wonderful man. He was shaking. From the back seat, Mrs. Allister laughed, breaking the tension. "I'll start planning the wedding as soon as we get home," she declared. Mrs. Allister threw herself into the wedding preparations, and she insisted that Julian halt all his work to stay by my side 24/7. Her vigilance, born from the memory of my disappearance in her past life, confirmed my theory. I didn't know how she had died, only that she and Sophie had been constantly at odds after Sophie married Leo. This time, although Leo and Sophie had been quiet, the look in Leo's eyes as we left the hospital that day had been enough to keep me on high alert. Finally, the wedding day arrived. I had shooed Julian out of the bridal suite, and I was waiting for the makeup artist when the door opened. A hotel waiter stood there, but I recognized the eyes above the uniform. They had finally come. Miss Fairchild, Sophie said, her voice disguised. Mr. Leo asked me to bring this milk for you. Give it to me, I said. The moment the glass was in my hand, I lunged forward, grabbing her by the neck and forcing the drugged milk down her throat. She clawed at her neck, trying to vomit, but the drug worked fast. She collapsed to the floor. I signaled to the people who had been waiting in the next room, and they quickly dressed the unconscious Sophie in a duplicate wedding gown. Our wedding was a magnificent affair. Julian took my hand as we walked onto the stage, and I could feel him trembling. I squeezed his hand, smiling up at him. When the officiant asked if I would take him as my husband, to love and support him in poverty and prosperity forever, my "I do" was clear and strong. Thunderous applause erupted as we kissed, and in the front row, Mrs. Allister wept with joy. At that exact moment, in a dilapidated wooden shack in the suburbs, a man with a scarred face looked down at an unconscious woman. "Boss, what do we do? This one stopped breathing." A bald man checked for a pulse and found none. Sophie's clothes were torn, her body bruised, her eyes wide open in a final silent scream. "What do you think we do?" the boss grunted. "There's a river nearby. Throw her in." They dragged her body out and tossed it into the water. Just as they turned to leave, they found themselves surrounded. "Police! Freeze!" At the airport, a man in sunglasses and a mask was about to board a plane. The moment he had seen the live stream of my wedding, Leo knew his plan had failed. He had booked the first flight out of the country, but he was one step too late. In the end, no one from the Allister family attended Leo's sentencing. As he was being escorted from the courtroom, Helen, his lover's mother, rushed from the crowd and plunged a knife into his heart. He died before the paramedics could save him. Helen was taken into custody, but not before one final act of madness. On her way out of the hospital after her husband's stroke, she had smothered Richard to death with a pillow. Looking at the final report Julian's people had sent over, I let out a long, slow breath. The nightmares of 2 lifetimes were finally over. Every person who had wronged me had met their deserved end. All that was left now was my future, a bright, open road with the man who loved me by my side.